close to them too to get their attention. So I'll put a row right in the middle there so I can walk down. And there'll be that little space there too.
And the younger, again, this is maybe broad strokes, the younger the ensemble, the more important that is. Because there are some things that you need to, as the teacher, need to go around and correct. You know, where you can look into, like horn, French horn, for example. You know, you don't have X-ray vision. You're not going to see if that right hand is in the correct position or not. You got to walk around and look and see. So the younger the group, the more I think that's important as far as proximity and things like that. The other thing I will say about this, because I do want to get into this just for a second, I can tell frequently individuals who have done a lot of score study versus individuals that have not done a lot of score study simply because of where their eyes are. If their eyes are here all the time, that tells me that they have not done enough score study. Now, don't misunderstand me. I am not suggesting that you got to have, you know, all of my scores. I'm not suggesting that in any way. That's you need to do that. But I will say I'm very comfortable in that the amount of eye contact that you give the ensemble is almost always directly related to the amount of score study that you do.
I do want to say one more thing about eye contact. When you're standing up there and you're looking down at the score the whole time, right, there are things that can happen, you know, like say you're particularly worried about this 8-bar phrase that's really technical and advanced or whatever, and you're watching it, making sure you're hearing what you're seeing and whatever. Well, you could miss, you know, your third chair kid that usually gets things like, you know, not getting it. You miss things like that if you're always looking down. And
Exactly.
it's one of those things that comes with years of experience, I think.
And one more comment about this. If you do nothing else when you're working on the eye contact part of the six-pack, if you do nothing else other than this, versus if you do nothing else other than that, you're well on your way. Okay. The fourth quote. Oh, sorry, wrist ictus. It's all on the wrist. What is an ictus, first of all? It's a gesture that shows musical pulse. Hands ready again, if you would. Clap where you think the beat is. Okay. I've made my point, right? All those things show where the beat is. However, when we're talking about how to do this efficiently, how to do this most effectively, the wrist is best for a couple of different reasons. Your wrist is one of the few joints in your body that has the ability, we'll look up here for a second, extension, flexion, abduction, adduction, circumlocution. Your wrist is one of the few joints in your body that can do all that. Take, for example, without harming anyone or anything, generate an ictus from your elbow, and only your elbow. You might need to retract your arm a little bit, but go ahead, just whatever's comfortable. No wrist ictus, just elbow ictus. Okay? Now, do the same thing from your shoulder. Now, do that same thing without needing to go to the hospital, because we don't need that for the New Mexico thing. But the shoulder ictus. Ready? Oh my heavens. Just don't even. Just don't even. Okay? The wrist is by far the most effective. Now, I don't want you to confuse me and say, well, a guy from Arkansas said we only move our wrist. No. Your elbow occasionally has to get involved. Your shoulder has to occasionally get involved. If nothing else, these joints take the wrist ictus to various points of the beat pattern or ensemble. Perfectly okay. But the pulse is primarily generated from here, to the wrist, not here or here. One more transfer. Many of you, particularly experienced teachers here, have probably taught beginning percussionists before. You would not teach them this. You would teach them this. Why? Because that's the most efficient way to do it. So same thing with wrist dictus. Okay. Now, one other thought. I don't want to get into this too heavy, but just as a thought. May I use you as a moment if you come up here?
Sure.
So, 120 beats a minute, staccato conducting. Okay.
To them.
Yep, to them. Now, looking at his wrist dictus right now, is it there? Primarily, it's in the elbow. Okay. Let's do that one more time. I'm going to put my finger right there. That's what I'm okay. Not only is that now a wrist dictus, the pulse is much cleaner now, isn't it? Okay. I do the same thing here. Same sort of thing there. Okay. Now, you're doing a wonderful thing at the break. Okay. But in terms of legato, your wrist is still going to be involved when you're legato conducting too, but not as much. Okay? Think about what you're actually showing with a wrist dictus and staccato conducting. You're teaching them silence between the pulses. Right? Separation, staccato. How do we show that as conducting through gesture? By not moving, even if it's for a split moment or split second. That separation of exactly what he just did is perfect. That's perfect staccato conducting because he has pauses in there. That's what that shows. Now let's go the other way. Same speed. Now, you notice here that the elbow and wrist is not, or the wrist, I'm sorry, the elbow is a little bit more involved and a little bit less wrist. That's perfectly okay. Why? Because we want to keep moving. Okay, we don't want those spaces in there. Now, let's do the same thing and use, we're going to stick it a little bit, use that much space. Exactly. Okay. And notice that the wrist is, even in that speed, is still involved, but it's not the same as a staccato line. Does that make sense? Okay. That's how we show separation, is by not moving for that split set. Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you. Hand of applause. And at the concert tomorrow, you'll notice a very distinct difference, I hope, if I'm doing my job between when I conduct the Brahms versus Armenian dances. It will look very different. Obviously, those pieces are different, but if I'm doing my job right, they will look different too. The fifth one, we already hinted at this a second ago. Smaller gestures. This is the classic example. Don't do anything. I'm just going to show you. This is the classic example. Guys are way too loud. Would you please play soft? Seriously? You're virtually shouting at the ensemble through gesture. What you're saying to them gesturally is not soft at all. They're probably giving you what you're asking for. If you're asking for this much sound, that's probably what you're getting, is that much sound. So when we're dealing with smaller gestures, in general, they're usually more precise. Sometimes we emote as conductors because things feel good. Or we think, wow, I saw someone do this and I'm going to emulate that gesture, even though it may not musically be the most appropriate gesture to do. The smaller gestures in general are more precise. And, that said, not everything should be small. There are times when you do want to have a large conducting frame, and you do want to take up a lot of space. If it's musically warranted and appropriate. If that's your default, though, that's no good. It has to be musically warranted and appropriate for the ensemble. When it comes to talking about size of gestures, it's all about the volume. The volume that you want from the ensemble, more often than not, is the size of the gesture that's correlated to it. Case in point, if you would, prepare to clap again. So I tried to do the same tempo and same style, but simply by the amount of space I was taking up in that fret beat, that immediately had an effect on your gesture, or excuse me, your volume that you were clapping. And then lastly, the infamous left hand structure. This is the one, it's sort of like doing a harmonic analysis or score study. This is the one that people are like, what do I do with my left hand? I don't know what to do with my left hand. I got the eye contact happening, I got the posture happening, I got the right hand wrist that's happening, but boy, this left hand is no man's land. I don't know what to do with this. I'll give you a couple of concrete suggestions here. This first one is like, well, duh, dude from Arkansas, I came here to do something, not do nothing. Trust me when I tell you that you're building left-hand independence sometimes when you do nothing with your left hand except keep it engaged. Case in point. You look up here, please. Do I have left-hand independence? Yes, I do. Do I have left-hand independence now?
No.
No, I don't. Okay. I'm not doing anything with my left hand except keeping it engaged and ready. I can do the same thing this way. Not doing anything with it, not really giving any other information with it, other than just saying, here it is, please join. By the way, this is sort of like walking and chewing gum, and all at the same time you can conduct and do all that sort of stuff and carry on a conversation. That's left-hand independence too. So sometimes the best thing to do as you're learning about left-hand independence is to do nothing. Just keep it engaged. I also like to, there's some different thoughts about, where to keep your left hand. And again, this is still in the conversation about doing nothing. But there are some people that suggest this. It's kind of a neutral left hand posture where your left hand is engaged but within yourself. And there are some people that I know that do this. When you see this gesture, what do you think of? Yeah, a stop, a silence, a staccato, I heard someone say. But if this is your default and you're playing legato music, that's some conflicting information. There's some people I know that do this. What does that mean?
Right.
Or some other thing. So the two postures that I like for the left hand, and for this one, I showed you this one already. This one I think is if you need a default, this is a good default. Because what you're doing with this gesture, what does that make you feel? Exactly, okay? What about this? You're not sure, okay? Fist bump, yeah, you're not sure, but it's not an invitational gesture, okay? So if you need a default for something to do, invite the ensemble to collaborate with you. And just keep your left hand here and do nothing else with it. If you stay here and do nothing else, that's going to be better than this. Your left hand now is totally disengaged. And it has nothing to contribute because it's out of the picture. And this, of course, there are times to mirror. I don't want you to think that I'm saying that you should never mirror. That is not true. There are times that it's very appropriate to do that. But do so purposefully. Do so because you choose to. Do so because it's what you want to tell the ensemble musically, not because it is a default. All right? The last thing, in terms of specific suggestions for the left hand, if you do nothing else other than create a little left hand independence there, and then third, show the shape and release of, or show, excuse me, the time and shape of releases. If you would, we'll pick a different note other than concert E. There's concert B flat, whatever octave is appropriate for you. Sing that on a loop, please. Again. got two very different musical responses there, didn't we? Okay? For most of us, for most young conductors, the default response is this. Again, there's nothing particularly wrong with that if that's what you want musically. If you want that sort of abrupt kind of sound and want that sort of termination, fine. But if you're conducting something very lyrically, use colonial song again, I don't think this is a gesture I would ever use in colonial song. Even though it's telling you to release. Think about the shape of the release. Think about how and this is where you can get creative with your left hand. There are lots and lots and lots of different things you can do with this. But this gives you structure in terms of how do I show that release and when do I show that release. That gives your left hand some structure. That make sense? These three things, and I know this because I do the exact same thing with my graduate students. These three things can be very, very helpful to learning what to do with this left hand. Do nothing, be invitational, and then focus on how and when and the shape of releases. As we conclude here, do you have something to say? If you want your students to engage with you, you have to engage with them in terms of the communication. And if they see a steady diet of the same old from you all the time, even though you're doing perhaps radically different pieces, that's not necessarily facilitating good communication. So everything that we've talked about today in this particular session, you can do every one of these things on Monday. Maybe not all at the same time. Don't do that. But pick one. Pick one piece of the six-pack that you're like, yep, I'm going to work on this starting on Monday. And you might notice some immediate benefits from that. Or you might have some that's like, okay, I'm going to work on this diligently. We're going to get better at this. It's longitude. But I'm promising you, you can do some of these things on Monday if you want to. And I will also say this, hopefully not as a way to offend, but hopefully just to bring a point home. If all you're doing is beating time, that's not good. And frankly, it's probably insulting to the ensemble, no matter what their level, because they're very, very capable. And if all you're doing is being a flesh and blood metronome for them, that's probably not the most musical experience that you can create. And finally, when I made this slide, I think of a specific director in my region in Arkansas. Because this person in his mind is conducting the Chicago Symphony and not the group that's actually in front of him. You can't conduct your way out of the group that you have already in front of you. Be realistic. Don't conduct who you want them to be. Or don't conduct who you wish they were. Excuse me, I missaid that. Don't conduct who you wish they were. Conduct who they actually are. Help them, communicate with them longitudinally over time. And I promise you'll see your result. Questions? Sir?
Conducting, baton or no baton?
I think it's totally your preference and totally the piece of music. For example, tomorrow when I conduct the Brahms, I will not have a baton. On our median dances, I will have a baton. I think it simply boils down to, are you clearly, effectively, and musically showing what you want from the group? And if they're eliciting, or you're able to elicit the response that you want musically. I mean, Kirk Mazur for the New York Philharmonic for many, many years never used a baton. I think he did okay. Vice versa, there's some people that, choral conductors, for example, whenever they use with instrumentalists, they use batons, the same thing, they never use batons otherwise. I think it's a personal preference as long as it's getting the desired result. Other questions?
Do you have any advice for us music education leaders who their first job will be beginning band or high school band?
Three things. One, learn everything you can here while you're on campus, especially as it pertains to your personal musicianship, because that's going to be the foundation for everything that pretty much we've talked about this morning. Get as good as you possibly can on your principal instrument. Secondly, understand the fact that you're going to make mistakes. Okay? There's an infinite distance between 0 and 1. So don't accept or be mindful of the fact that you're probably going to make some errors. as long as they're not felonious or, any sort of, panic-inducing errors, you're probably gonna be all right. It's okay if you just tell someone a fingering, but you realize after, it's okay. You don't have to be perfect. Give yourself some permission to make some mistakes, as long as they're legal mistakes. And then third, I would continue, I always say this to the folks at A-State, and Professor Seifert may feel differently about this, but I always tell our students at A-State, when you graduate as an undergraduate, we are preparing you to be successful your first, maybe your second year of teaching. Because it is not possible for any institution to tell you and teach you everything you need to know within 4 or 5 years. The continued professional development, the professional development that your colleagues here, some of whom drove several hours to be here, that's their commitment to professional development. That's their commitment to ongoing learning. That's their commitment to, I need to get better. I need to learn more. I need new ideas. I want to try some new things. I want to experience new things. Infinite distance between 0 and 1, right? So keep learning, keep growing. Don't just, well, I've got a degree. I'm good. Anything else? Throughout the day, whether it's with the whatever ensemble, if you have questions, please, I'm always happy to answer. And if you have any questions or things you want me to clarify, I would be more than happy to do that. I sincerely hope that you have at least 1 or 2 things that you picked up today that you'll be able to incorporate into your classrooms and into your own teaching. And I especially want to say for those of you that are professional music educators, some of whom, as I said, drove a significant distance to be here, thank you for being here. I know your students will appreciate it. I know I certainly appreciate it. So thank you all very much. Professor Seifert, thank you.